Paul Carcaterra to talk some lacrosse. Carc, this is nice for us, a little break from the basketball talk to talk about some lacrosse. Syracuse, #1 in the country. I know it's only February. I know Gary Gate and Joey Spallina, they've kind of downplayed that win over Maryland. In your mind, though, how important was it to beat that opponent and to show themselves they could do it?
I think it was super important based on the fact that it hadn't been done in so long. I remember in the booth, Anish Shroff and Quintessinic and I were all talking about what the win would mean for either team and who had more stress on them. And I thought it was unequivocally Syracuse hadn't beaten Maryland in 17 years. I mean, that's a driver's license. You can drive at 16. So, I mean, it's insane when you think about it. And Tillman's been 8-0 prior to that game last Friday night against Syracuse and 5-0 against Gary Gate. So, yeah, I think it was massive because for a team that has national title aspirations, I think you want to go into the tournament not having any doubt that you can't beat a certain opponent, or why haven't you done it, and why haven't you done it with this year's version of the Cuse, right? Everyone's talking about this senior class, and they came in as freshmen as the top class in the country and, coming off a historically bad season prior to their arrival on campus where they won 4 games in 2022, and then they're 8-7, and then they get to the quarterfinals the next year, and then championship weekend last year. The next step is a national title, right? Everyone thinks that. In Syracuse, everyone thinks that in the locker room. A lot of people in the lacrosse world now think that. But prior to beating Maryland, they kind of questioned, could they ever get past the Terps? So I think it was massive on a few fronts. One, getting the monkey off the back, but more importantly, heading into May knowing you can beat Maryland rather than why can't we?
Yeah, and one thing we've been talking about is the way that they beat him as well, right? There's been a lot of talk, and the criticism of Syracuse is they can't win a low-scoring physical game. They can't beat Maryland at their own game, and they kind of did that last week. They won the ground ball battle. They won a relatively low-scoring game. It was right there for the taking in the fourth quarter, and they got the job done. Did anything stand out to you about the win, about how they got it done?
Yes, I think you kind of touched on it. It's just the unison of that defense, right? Like, I just think John O'Derna, the defensive coordinator, has done a fantastic job. Normally in February, you don't see defenses that dialed in, right? Like, you can slide at the right time, but it's more than that. It's like the recovery. Like, if you really watch the way that they were supporting one another, and in basketball terms, it's like, you're showing support on the ball carrier, but like the rest of the defense is just in such unison when there's 4 others. Well, in lacrosse, there's the 5 other guys that are just in lockstep, and that's what impressed me the most was not just how they defended the ball, but how they defended away from the ball. Right, like they did a great job. I thought Riley Figueres and Billy Dwan were fantastic, but the other pieces too, like Vinny Bolognino, right? He was outstanding. Chuck Kaczynski, they put him down low from up top. Like, these guys were just totally speaking the same language. The timing of their slides and the recovery of their slides to support the rest of that defense and Jimmy McCool and Cage, I thought was the most telling. And I think on the other end, Joey Spellina just played, from an IQ perspective, one of his best games. He had a first-team All-American defender on him in Will Schaller. I thought last year when he had Sean Light from Notre Dame, who was a National Defender of the Year, he took them out of their comfort zone, playing in the perimeter, and he made them play off ball. And you just see how slick he is with finding seams as a shooter, and he let the game come to him. So it was like a relentless defense on one end that was foaming out of the mouth, but they were like dialed in, and a offense that was really composed and just let the game come to them. So I thought it was like a perfect balance.
Yeah, we have Coach O'Derna on this show quite a bit, and we love talking to him. He's so impressive and does such a great job with that defense. And you mentioned Joey Spallina, and I kind of wanted to go there next. We've seen him every step of the way just kind of seem to improve and get better year after year. Came in highly touted, wore the 22 and has worn it, proudly. And, he's had a lot of pressure on him, obviously, and we know that it's championship or bust this season for him and for this team. How have you seen him improve his game? What area, I guess, has stood out to you the most and how he's gotten better from freshman year to where he is now?
That's how he leads the offense, how he doesn't need the ball in his stick all the time and how good he is away from the ball. I think when you're a young player and you want to prove yourself, you want to prove that you can own every single matchup. There's different ways to own a matchup, whether it's beating the defender, like a drum one-on-one, or if it's taking him out of his element and making him play off ball. I just think he's really, really been able to see the game at another level. Like the guy has a PhD in just understanding lacrosse and offense and the way that the ball has to cycle, and like he's conducting an entire offense. I look at like Billy Dwan conducts a defense, right? And Riley Figueres is a great cover guy, but like in terms of the way that defense moves, so much is put on Billy Dwan. So much is put on Joey Spelina on the offensive end. And, everyone talks about 22 and the hype, and I just try to compare Joey to Joey and let him write his own narrative, because the reality is, he's not going to be Mike Powell, who's the greatest attackman of all time in my mind. And he's not going to be Gary Gait, who's the greatest player of all time in my mind. But he can be Joey Spallina, and his narrative could be really cool, because when he came in and he wore a 22, the program in the modern era was about as low as it possibly could get. In 2022, they won 4 games. Let's be honest. It was a horrible, horrible year. He comes in when a program is kind of, at the intersection, like which way is it going to go? Is this young group of talented kids going to bring Syracuse back? And I think he has. He brought them back to championship weekend. They're number 1 team in the country. So, that's kind of how I like to dissect his journey. So he's accomplished that and more in my mind. I'm not here to compare him to Gary Gait or to Mike Powell. I'm kind of dissecting his journey. His journey is really, really remarkable. The production is unquestioned. He's put up so many points, and he's proved the doubters wrong, whether it was last year at the quarterfinals against Princeton when he was amazing, bringing the team back to championship weekend, and now it has them as the number 1 ranked team in the country. Yeah, it's only February, but it's like every step of the way he is getting better with the team. And that means a lot.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. Great way to look at it. I want to stay on offense. We saw Michael Leo start on attack against Maryland. Finn Thompson played the midfield. Would you keep Michael Leo on attack from what you've seen to this point?
I think depending on the matchup. I mean, Finn Thompson is one of the best pickers in college lacrosse. Like, he just sets a pick and he slips a pick is about as well as any player can. The problem with that is sometimes they're going to short stick Finn Thompson if he goes to attack, and then they double pull the midfield, and that kind of takes the flow out of your offense a little bit. I think Finn can be just as valuable to the team as a midfielder or as an attackman, because he's probably going to get the short stick in either case, unless you really are thinking outside the box like John Tillman did. John Tillman put a long pull on Finn Thompson because he was so concerned about the pick game, where Finn would take a long pull to a short pull and get the switch. So Tillman is really, really thinking. But more times than not, teams are going to short stick Finn Thompson, whether he's at attack or midfield. And he can play a ton of shifts at midfield. He could probably play 75, 80% of the shifts, because he'll never go back on defense. They'll surround him with 2 guys that can go both ways, and he'll kind of sub in and out of the box. But when you put Michael Leo at attack with Peyton Anderson, who they call Bear, who's a really, really big, strong presence, and Joey Spallina, those are 3 really strong Dodgers, guys that you have to put a pull on, guys that you have to slide and support. And that kind of puts a lot of pressure on a defense because not many teams have three defenders that can cover those kind of dodgers. So more times than not, I'm game for Leo and and Anderson and Spelina being the combination attack. But I'm also game for Finn Thompson being on the field as much as possible because I think his off-ball play and how slick he is really, really important. So as long as Leo and Thompson are on like 80% of the offensive shifts, that works for me. Typical lacrosse at the midfield, you're only going to be on 50 to 60% of the shifts, but you have some full field responsibilities. With Thompson and Leo, I would have whoever's playing midfield come on the field virtually every shift, but not have any defensive responsibility.
ESPN lacrosse analyst Paul Carcaterra joining us here for just another couple of minutes here on Orange Nation. I do want to look ahead to this weekend, and let's begin with the Syracuse-Harvard game. They obviously played two very close games last year. Harvard beat them in the Dome in the regular season, and Syracuse got them back in the first round of the NCAA tournament. What do you make of this matchup? What can you tell us about the Crimson?
Well, those games were epic last year. I mean, good news for Syracuse is, Sam King's no longer playing at Harvard. He graduated. He's one of the best players that's ever played. But bad news is they still have Jack Spidell, who's a fantastic attacker. And I think he's the type of player that could play professionally, and he's one of the better, most underrated players in the country. So he's going to be a lot to deal with. Their goaltender, Graham Stevens, is back after a really strong freshman year. He's looked awesome in the early season, whether it's scrimmages or I caught some of their action against Colgate. He was phenomenal. My biggest concern, though, isn't really Spidell and Stevens. It's the weather. And people laugh at me when I say this. I think Syracuse is one of the worst bad weather lacrosse teams in the country. They play in 70 degrees climate control every single day. They rarely get outside. As of last week, they hadn't been outside once practicing in the elements, where all these other schools are practicing virtually every day in 20 degrees, 30 degrees. So unless Syracuse got the field plowed, and as of last week, when I was up there last Friday, there was no fields being plowed, I'd be seriously concerned about going to Boston and playing in, 30, 40 degree weather, potential for some mixed precipitation. That's a recipe for disaster for Syracuse. This is a team that doesn't know how to play at their level outside in February and March, right? Because they play in Ensley every day for practice. They play their games in the Carrier Dome. I mean, it's nice and cozy in there last time I checked. And that's a serious concern. So if you tell me they got 2 or 3 days outside this week, I'm feeling pretty good. If you're telling me that, their first day outside is a walkthrough today in Boston, not good.
Yeah, great point. Last one for you, Cark, before we get you out of here. Huge slate of games this weekend. Maryland, Princeton. You've got UNC Hopkins tonight. There's Georgetown, Notre Dame, Cornell, Denver. When you look, and I know it's a small sample size, but when you look around the country right now, outside of Syracuse and Maryland, has anybody stood out to you here in the early going, or should we be on the lookout for which team is maybe next in line in the pecking order?
I think Cornell and the Ivy are going to be a lot to deal with, just based on the fact they started a little bit later. And Princeton didn't look good last week against Penn State. I got to watch that tape back, and they defensively they had a lot of holes. And Cornell struggled with Albany, but that was their first time on a field for an official game. So I think the Ivy is going to be really, really strong again with Cornell and Princeton being the headliners. I mean, Cornell and Ryan Goldstein's back. I know C.J. Kurst and 13 other seniors left their championship run, but they have some pieces on every level of the field to be successful. Again, Princeton's offense is great. But tonight's matchup that I have on ACC Network at 5 p.m. between Johns Hopkins and Carolina, I think it's a massive, massive matchup on a few fronts. One, we have both teams that have sharpshooters and really high-level offensive players against two freshman goalies. Freshman goalie and Josh Marcus at Carolina, Dash Lamedy from Johns Hopkins. They're high-level recruits, but this is their first massive, massive test. But the second piece to all this is Syracuse beats Maryland last week in the Dome. That's a ACC win over a Big Ten win. Johns Hopkins is in the Big Ten in college lacrosse. If Carolina beats Hopkins, these early season February matchups, with the RPI, and a lot of people don't like the RPI in lacrosse because it doesn't have the sample size of basketball. Those are going to be field tilters in terms of Selection Sunday. So this is a game tonight. If Carolina wins, this is another feather in the cap for the ACC, and it's not going to be great for the Big Ten when you look at the head-to-head and the RPI ramifications.
Great stuff as always. Appreciate you coming on. Have a great call tonight, and hopefully we can chat again as the lacrosse season moves along. Thanks for coming on, Carc.
Thank you.
All right, Paul Carcaterra, ESPN lacrosse analyst.